Imagine being a PhD in nuclear science, having worked in different Fortune 500 companies, but still having the door shut on you by your own family's conglomerate. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story, and let me tell you a little bit about our newsmaker today. We're going to be talking in a couple of minutes from now to Dr. Valli Arunachalam. As I said, she's a PhD in nuclear physics. She's a nuclear scientist. She's an expert in the semiconductor industry based out of the United States of America. But she has been refused a seat on the board of her own family's corporation, the Murugappa Group. This is because ever since her father passed in 2017, there were no sons to replace him. That's right. This is a conversation we're still having in the India of 2022. Dr. Arunachalam is fighting this legally, and she says it's not a fight just for her, it's a fight for millions of Indian women. Where, as we know, the representation of women in boardrooms, women leading companies continues to be abysmal. Dr. Arunachalam is a highly qualified person to have a seat on the board. Her wing of the family has a little under 9% stake in the company. And despite this, as she says, for close to 120 years, no woman from her family has had a seat on the Murugappa Corporation's board. Let's introduce Dr. Valli Arunachalam today. Ma'am, thank you. It's a pleasure having you with us. And I'm actually astounded by the idea that for 120 years, there hasn't been a woman from the family on the board of the Murugappa Group. Ah, why do you think that is? This is 2022. I can understand 100 years ago. How do they explain it today?
That is my fight. And that's what I'm fighting to change, Barkha. This cannot exist in the 21st century. It belongs in the 18th century. And I know all of your viewers are young and upcoming professionals, a lot of them. And I want them to know that when they enter the workforce, I do not want them to face the kind of barriers that I have faced. I am
Yeah.
fighting for 500 million Indian women. I do not want them to face the difficulties that I'm facing.
Yeah, I'm going to come to just a moment with your fight with the Murugappa Group, but I want our audience to learn a little bit more about you, the space in which you are in. Now as an expert in the semiconductor industry, but earlier a PhD in nuclear sciences. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that space is not a space where we typically see too many women either. How did you get interested in this space? How did you get your PhD in this space? Tell us a little bit about you and the barriers you've had to break down, even just to get to where you are.
I think it all starts at home. Both my father and my mother uh, always ensured that education was the most important thing. And they encouraged us to pursue our dreams. My father was a technologist, and we had dinner table conversations about technology. We had a lot of friends and scientists visiting home, and I just felt like I was part of the conversation, and that's how my interest started in science. And um, and then it all began when I so we had a friend friends in Kalpakam, and we used to visit Kalpakam in the weekends. And I was just fascinated by the power of the atom. I would see the twinkling lights of Chennai in the distance and think, how could such tiny atoms power an entire city? And that's where my fascination with nuclear science started. And I went on all the way. I couldn't stop. I just kept on and kept on going till I got that PhD. I was the only woman in a class of 25, but you will be happy to note that I never faced gender discrimination as the only woman in a class of 25.
And yet you're
And
facing gender discrimination in your own family's
yeah, I
family
mean,
owned
isn't it
company.
ironic?
Yeah.
Isn't it ironic? That is where one would expect that you would be accepted.
Yeah. So
But yeah.
tell us about this battle. Basically, your father passes in 2017. There are no sons that can be heirs. They're just you and your sister. And basically, is that the reason that your family gives you? What actually happens? How does it come to be that there is no one now from your family on the board? Your father was represented on the board because he was male, and because there were no boys, there were no sons, you didn't get a place. uh, Elaborate a little bit on what's happened since 2017. This is the board members that we're seeing, and as we're seeing them, I'm going to of course ask you a counter that they may put forth, which is that one of the independent directors who's not a family member, they will say, is a woman. So they're going to use that to argue that, and there she is, that there is no inherent gender bias. But as you have pointed out, for 120 years, there's been no woman from the family. So go ahead, tell us what's actually going on with the group.
I mean, they have checked the box when it comes to one independent director in the public companies that SEBI mandates that you need to have an independent director. But in my opinion, that is tokenism, right? There have been 18 daughters over 4 generations. Why
Wow.
is it that not even one daughter has made it into the family business? I think the facts speak loud and clear. If this is not gender discrimination, what is?
18 daughters over the years have never got a place on the board in the Murugappa
No.
Group. 18 daughters.
I wouldn't even go as far as board. They haven't even made it to any level in the business. It's a
And
sons only club.
it's a sons only club. And when you probably, before you fought legally, you would have argued this out with the other members of the family. What did they say?
I mean, well, I applied for a seat on the board of the holding company because my family owned six has 8.23%, which is comparable to all the other family branches. And my father held the board seat for many decades, but it's been, since 2017, no, his board seat remains vacant, whereas in the case of my uncles, after their passing, their sons step into the shoes of their father. So, why is it that when sons can step into the shoes of the father, daughters cannot step into the shoes of their father?
Yeah, and that's such an important point. I didn't actually realize that. You're saying that the seat against your father's stake is actually empty. They'd
Yes,
rather have nobody represent or nobody take that seat on the board than have a woman in that seat.
yes. They cannot stand to have a woman on the seat. I mean, and the
Amazing.
other the other thing I want to contrast is when I applied for the seat on the board of the holding company, I had a PhD and I had several patents and research papers to my credit and 23 years experience in the semiconductor industry. Whereas many of my male cousins, when they were inducted to the board, they were fresh out of college, had very little experience, industrial experience. So, just why is the hurdle so high for a daughter and so low for a son?
Yeah. And basically, therefore, you were better qualified than most of your male cousins who have places on that board.
I mean, I'm just stating the facts and
Yeah.
I will just let the facts speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
120 years, no woman, 18 daughters over the years, no position of significance, a sons only club, a PhD in nuclear science considered not qualified enough. How has the legal fight been for you? You don't live here. It can be isolating. It can be lonely. This couldn't be easy. You're taking on, a 38,000 crore valued conglomerate, which is powerful, which has connections. How have these last few years been for you?
What I can tell you is that when I got into this, I got into it with full knowledge of the bigger picture that I'm fighting for. That's what keeps me going, right? even though I lost the board seat and I was unanimously voted out by the family members, yes, of course, I'm human. There is dejection, but I didn't dwell on it. That was the turning point. I decided, if a person with capability and credentials can be shot down for a board position, imagine what every other woman is facing. I need to ensure that as long as women have capability and credentials, they should have a fair chance to make it to the boards of companies. And that's what I'm fighting for.
And your fight, as you said, is for 500 million Indian women. The numbers, and you've done some, I know, research into this. Your own fight has made you look at those numbers. Those numbers don't paint a good story, whether it's the number of women heading companies at the unicorns, or whether you simply look at women CEOs in India. A Deloitte report actually tells you, Dr. Arunachalam, that these numbers, instead of going up, have actually come down. So if you look at that number, it was a little over 6% in 2016. Then it falls to 3.4% in 2018. So you're actually seeing these numbers go down. And even though it climbs up slightly, it's still less than it was in 2016. Fewer Indian women are working today than used to. Fewer Indian women are getting funded for startups. And that's where the number stands, 4.7% in 2021. That is a shockingly abysmal figure. So I want you to come in on the big picture and what your own fight has taught you about how power, corporate power, is still denied to women.
Yeah, I mean, the statistics are dismal. Like the Global Gender Gap Index that was published in 2022, India for the first time dropped to the bottom 10% out of all the countries, out of 146 countries. And this, imagine what would happen if we had both women and men powering India's economy. I mean, right now we are the fifth largest economy in the world, right? So even with this dismal statistic, right, imagine if we could empower our women, where we would be. We would be the biggest. We have the potential to be the biggest economy in the world. And on that same vein, what I would like to say is, India's biggest asset is her youth. And what I would like to say to your audience who are very, very youthful is, you need to get in on this fight, and we need to snowball this into a bigger movement. I mean, through this fight, I've spoken to women in various fields. Whether I've spoken to young women MPs, I've spoken to academicians in academia, I've spoken to people in social organizations as well, and everywhere there is a dearth of women.
Yeah.
And we need to all get together and collectively improve the situation.
I
And we
couldn't
need to
agree.
go
Yeah, sorry.
accelerated to the powers that be, so that they can make the necessary changes that will help increase the number of women at the top. And when you do that, you automatically, that'll percolate down to the lower levels as well.
I think you'd pointed out in an earlier interview that companies that are led by women have a 14% higher number of women represented on the board as compared to companies that are led by men. Let me ask you finally, you've had some legal sort of reprieves, things have gone in your favor recently with the appeals by the Murugappa company being rejected. You've said you're ready to take this fight to the Supreme Court. This is going to be a long fight. Any last thoughts about how much is taken from you to fight for what's essentially your right?
I'm a nuclear engineer, and it's the nuclear energy within me that keeps me going. And it's the passion that I have. When you have passion for something, there's no getting tired.
Well, more power to you. I'm glad we got to speak. The story is shocking. And as you said, it's not only your story. We still have a boys only, sons only attitude when it comes to companies passing on to the hands of men as heirs. Dr. Valli Arunachalam, a highly
Yeah.
qualified nuclear engineer, this should never have happened to you. May you keep fighting the good fight, and we'll closely follow this case. Thank you so much, ma'am, for talking to us. Take care and stay strong.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.